We will go ahead and get started here today. So before we do anything, I should have all the labs graded right now, everything up until lab 5, and that should be all of the labs that you have. So questions about any of the labs, anything that you think I should cover in more detail at this time? If you have any questions about grading or anything like that, you can just stick around after class or send me an email or something like that. But any general questions right now?
It's kind of just about the screenshot standards.
Mm-hmm.
I realized I didn't have full screenshots, and then I kept turning them in without having the full desktop, but you didn't take off points later. Is that just having mercy, or?
Yeah, so when I went through this so I'm assuming you got a point taken off. So at this point, I did take at least a point off if you didn't have full screen screenshots. And since I graded 3 through 5 all at one time, I would have just taken off a point on like lab 3, but not taken it off on 5.
Okay.
So I didn't enforce the screenshot rules on 5 since I didn't want to doubly penalize people. But definitely, again, try and make sure and do that in the future. So, is that what happened? Did I just take them off on 3? Okay.
I just thought, having the whole desktop and, one command or two commands, I thought it was going to look worse. So.
And it certainly does look worse, but it's just something I need to be able to ensure that you're actually submitting your own work. So, and I can zoom in and see things usually just fine. And if it's 10 megabytes, 20 megabytes, doesn't really matter to me. So, okay, yep. So, okay, the one thing I'll say about one of the labs, I guess, that I saw a lot is actually looking at the service one. So. Just remember, when you're specifying a path, like obviously it has to be correct. If you're making a script, let's say you just logged into your box or whatever, and you say script touch script.sh, that is not script.sh. That would be a script in the root directory. So the root directory is here. If we do pwd, our home directory is right here. So when we're doing our exec start, and we would say, let's say again we have this script.sh here, it's what we want. Let's say we want to start that up, and we say our exec start line. This would obviously be inside of our script under the service section. We would say exec start script script.sh, and we look at slash, there's nothing there, the script isn't there. So we have to make sure we actually specify the right path. I saw a lot of people just saying slash script.sh, even though they were making their script inside of their home directory. If you wanted to point it to your home directory, I wouldn't recommend doing this. You could do exec start equals home dsu script.sh, then that would work fine. And that was the main problem that I saw, was people not actually specifying the correct paths to their script. So just remember, if you wanted to put the script in root, all you have to do is mv script.sh slash, and we're not root, we have to have root permissions to copy that. And now we can see our script is actually in the root directory, and then this exec start line would work. So that was the one thing that I saw. Just make sure that you actually have the right path, I guess. So any other questions, things you want me to talk about? All right. So just remember, we are talking about this right now. We're trying to build up to this multi-server kind of internet application. Right now, we're looking at web servers. We're going to take a look at nginx today, which is another web server, kind of in the same space as Apache. And then we're also going to hopefully look at how do we actually execute PHP code from our web server, and that's a very common thing that we will want to do kind of on our web servers on Linux. So we can just go ahead and get started talking about that. I think I'll talk about nginx first, and then we'll well, no, never mind. Let's talk about PHP first. Let's do that. So there's really two ways that we can enable PHP, at least on Apache. There's actually a PHP plugin for Apache which executes the PHP code directly in the Apache process. So when you see a PHP file in your var www directory or whatever, it will simply grab the source of it, it'll evaluate, and it will send the results to the client directly from PHP. The other way we can do this is with FPM, so PHP FPM. We'll look at this approach right here. That's one way that we can do it in Apache, and that's the only way we can do it in nginx is with the PHP FPM route. So with PHP FPM, there's actually a TCP socket listening, typically port 9000 on your box if you have PHP FPM installed. And what will happen is when a request comes in from Apache, from the HTTP server, it will forward that request off to the FPM server to actually execute the file. And that's kind of the secondary way of doing it on Apache, but it's pretty simple to enable. So I'm going to show you how to do that really quick when we're going through all of this. So let's get started here. Again, pretty simple. I think I actually have FPM enabled right now, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off quick. So let's say we have some PHP code. So we'll go over to var www html, and what we'll do, I have this info here, I'll just move that info to my.php. And I'll say info PHP. So if you're familiar with the structure of HTML at all, PHP is kind of similar. We have this opening PHP tag, and we have this closing question mark and then bracket. And everything inside these two things will be executed as PHP code. And a very common function that's run is PHP info. What that will do is it will print information about your PHP environment, your PHP configuration, and all of that stuff. And this is just very basic. Quite often you'll see something like PHP code embedded inside of HTML documents. So you say body, things like that. And then there's actual HTML that's retrieved from your PHP code that you put into your actual HTML document that's eventually served back to the client. So when we're serving this, well, let's look at the default behavior, I guess. So I'm going to restart Apache really quick here because I think I might have had some things sticking around. And then what I will do is navigate on over to that page, info.php. And we can see right now, without any PHP handler installed, without any module to actually process that PHP code, it's just serving the raw text source back to us when we navigate to that page. So let's go ahead and install mod PHP really quick and see how easy it is to start executing that PHP code. So just say apt install lib, I think it's Apache 2 mod PHP. You can see it's actually enabling the module right now, and I think we'll actually be good to go. We might have to restart it. And it's not actually liking my code right now, so I must have messed something up. Typing it, we can see we got this HTTP error 500. You can't see it on the screen there, but we got a 500 error. What that means is there was that error code means internal server error. So that means something broke when we were processing our request. Something in our code wasn't right. So I'm just going to go back here. I don't know exactly what I did. PHP info. Let's say we don't know what's going on. We could actually go over to var www Apache 2. Or no, sorry. Var log Apache 2 error log. PHP info, undefined function. So we can actually see our errors that are being emitted from our application here. I guess it's kind of a useful thing to see. I swear it's PHP info. Oh, it's no underscore, that's why. Okay. We'll just take out that underscore and then refresh this page, and we see this PHP info display. So it's just a common thing that you might see on a PHP install, is just seeing where all of your stuff is. It prints out a whole bunch of information that's kind of worth noting about PHP, like what server you're running, like what a bunch of different stuff, and all the modules you have enabled, and then all the like headers and stuff that you started out with. So this is a good way to get to know your PHP installation, I guess. And that's pretty straightforward. So we can see with that way of doing things with Apache, you literally just install one package and you automatically have PHP execution. There's nothing you really have to do. It's pretty much just magical, if you will. So I'm actually going to go ahead and remove that. So that was the same in-process PHP execution, I guess. If you look at our PSOXF output right now, we have our Apache server right here. And when I say in process, there's these Apache handlers actually, which actually handle the web requests as they come in, and the code is executed directly inside of this handler itself. So right in line with all the rest of the processes. When we switch over to the FPM way of doing things, this handler will receive the request, and then it will actually pass it off to this PHP FPM process, and it will execute it over there. And one of the things you might end up noticing, well, one of the things you might run into eventually, is the FPM user and the Apache user might be different. In this case, we're fine. They're both dub data. So just something to keep in mind is if you have permission errors, things like that, you might need to ensure that those two are the same. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove mod PHP right now. I think I'll have to remove this PHP 7 as well. So there's, back when I first started doing this, you're on version 5 or so, now we're on 7. But when we install this libapache2 mod PHP, that's really just an alias for the most current revision here. So you might have to uninstall a different package too to actually get it removed. And we can see that's where the actual thing went to disable the PHP module. So if we went back over here and refresh this page again, now that we had removed that module to execute the PHP code, we can see we just are displayed, our source is just displayed again. So that's worth noting. So let's say we wanted to do this with PHP FPM. Again, the out of process thing, we'd say bt install PHP FPM. And we say netstat ltpn, and we can see it's not running right now. Systemctl start PHP FPM. Do I have that down here? No. PHP FPM. Well, okay, maybe, okay. Var run PHP. Okay. So, so this was kind of catching me off at first. I was expecting to see it listening on port 9000 here. So when I did my netstat, I was expecting to see a PHP FPM process, but it's actually only listening on this Unix socket. So remember when we talked about Unix sockets? Basically, just think of them as TCP sockets, but they're only listening on localhost, really. There's none of the IP overhead, none of the other overhead when it comes to doing things like that. So basically, we would just connect to this socket right here, this var run PHP PHP7-FPM sock, and then forward off our requests to that other daemon running in the background. So it should be pretty easy to actually enable PHP FPM on Apaches as well. We could do it kind of a harder manual way, but there's a pretty easy way. So we Apache 2, and we can actually go into conf available. And remember, let's go over this again, I guess. Ah, shoot. All over the place today. So there's these kind of pairs of folders, if you remember. There's available and there's enabled. So all of your files start off in available, and then you symlink them over to enabled. So if we look in conf available, we can see we have a couple files. We're going to look at this one right here, this php7fpm.conf. And then we look at conf enabled. And we can see these are actually symbolic links over to conf available. So it's a good way to just keep your configurations kind of sitting around without actually deleting them or commenting them out or anything. So to turn on PHP FPM, it's pretty easy. It's just a2 nmod PHP, what's our name here? Conf enabled, available again. PHP 7.0 fpm.conf, so a2n conf, so I use mod, not conf. PHP 7.0 fpm. So pretty easy, and then we restart. We'll look at what this actual configuration file is doing and how it's able to do those things in just a minute here. But now if we go back over here, we can see our PHP code is executing again. And just one more time, what that actually means is instead of executing here, we are sending our code to this PHP FPM process, and it's executing over there. So just slightly different, but it's just kind of worth noting. This is kind of the fast CGI approach of doing things. There's other applications other than PHP that do things this way. There's alternative ways of executing PHP code that might be faster, might be slower, and those usually follow this fast CGI FPM configuration. So it's definitely worth noting how to be able to do those things. But just to really briefly look at what's going on here, we can look at our php7 fpm.conf. Basically what it's saying here is if mod PHP isn't installed, it will go ahead and do these things. So if your file matches this regular expression, then it will proxy that request to this PHP socket, and it will use the fast CGI protocol. Now we can look and see what this regex actually is doing here. We have any character 0 or more, or 1 or more times. So remember, star is 0 or more, plus is 1 or more. And then we have a literal period. So since, remember, period does have special meaning in regular expressions, you'll need to escape that period. So it's a literal period followed by ph, and then either p followed by one of these numbers, and those numbers are optional, this signal's optional, or t or HTML, and then that's the very end of the line. It will do this right here. So it will pass that. So it's kind of a complex regular expression. When you're thinking about that, you probably would only do PHP and then $, and call it good. But there's also, I've seen applications where it's been like PHP 5 or something, or PHP 4, or PH4, or one of those ways of doing things, because people want to indicate that that's supposed to be executed with the 5th version of the PHP interpreter. But most of the time you'll just see PHP code. But it's kind of interesting to understand what they're trying to do there with their regular expression. And there's a couple different other things here, but it doesn't really matter that much, I don't think. So yeah, that's pretty much all you would need to know about FPM configuration. It's pretty much as simple as turning it on if you wanted to do that, and we'll call that good. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to actually stop Apache, just so it's not listening on port 80 anymore. So when we start looking at nginx, that will be listening on port 80 as well, so I don't want conflicts. I should go back and I should say that's one of the things that was also happening on the labs is with the service one is you would start your service, your script or whatever, and it would be listening on, let's say, port 2000, and you'd background it and you leave it there. And you'd see something like netcat, or like, I guess in this case, on port 9000. But if there's something already bound on that port, and you go and you try and start your service, it's just going to fail, since netcat's already listening on port 9000. So let's say we wanted to fix that. We could just go to our netstat output. Remember when we were specifying P, that specifies that we want to see the program name. So let's say our process is running in the background. We could just go here, we could find this PID, and we could say kill that PID. And in this case, I don't think that's going to do anything. It's going to hopefully immediately restart, since that's our service configuration. It's just going to automatically restart. But if you just run the one-off command and backgrounded it, that would actually end up stopping it. And just something that I remembered that I saw when I was looking at the labs. So the same thing applies here. I mean, if we have one HTTP server, Apache 2, running on port 80, and we try and start up another one, nginx, it's just going to fail. So I'm just going to stop it for now. Later, when we come back to this, we might turn on Apache on one port and turn on nginx on another. But that's neither here nor there. So let's go ahead and install nginx. So again, super straightforward, just like Apache. It's just install nginx. We'll download some packages. Looks like it's going to start things up. And there we go. We have nginx running on port 80 already. So if we navigate back over here now, you can actually see it's still pointing to the Apache 2 start page. So let's go over to var.html, and actually you can see that nginx installed a new file right here, and this is normally the file we'd see by default when we logged into nginx. We just happen to be seeing the Apache 2 page right now since we have Apache installed as well. So this is normally the page that we would see when we had initially installed nginx, and it's pretty straightforward. So we're going to kind of cover the same directives that we covered with Apache. We're going to talk about the document root. We're going to talk about location, denying access to certain files and stuff like that. And then the configuration layout is actually kind of similar. There's the sites available and sites enabled. So again, symbolic links from sites available into sites enabled. Sites enabled. You can see there's this default link over to sites available. So we're just going to go in and we're going to modify that default site. We're going to take a look at that and look at the directives inside of it. Okay, so slightly different syntax. Kind of remember that Apache was based on XML. This is more bracketed, kind of weird, if you will. But the configuration directive should be simple enough to understand. It just says listen on port 80. So maybe we'll try that out right away. Let's say we wanted to change nginx to listen on, like, say 88 or something like that. We could just change it right there. I'm going to comment out this IPv6 line right now, and just so we can not deal with that. Then you'd say systemctl reload nginx netstat ldpn, and there we see nginx is now listening on port 88. So pretty, straightforward. You can kind of just figure out how to do that. This default server line right here, that's optional. What that is saying is if there's no host name specified, if you're going directly to an IP address, it would default to this server right here. So not really worth noting much. So remember, we had the document root directive on Apache. We have the root directive on nginx. So it says var html. server name underscore means that it's the default server. And we can see here, this is what would have actually happened if Apache hadn't been installed. It would have installed its index to index nginx debian.html, and it would have gone down this list of files. It would have tried to index for index.html, index.htm, and then it would have finally found this as being its actual index. So in our default nginx configuration, it's just any path. So if we say slash location slash, that's basically anything. What it will try and do is it will try and open the file okay, so what it will try and do is it will do two different things. It will try and open the file that was the URI. So when we're saying URI, we're talking about this component right here. This is the URI. It will try just to open this component right here. If there's additional things like a question mark equals something like that, that's not part of the URI. This is just the URI right here. And it will also try and like open the URI slash. So just handling a couple of different things there. So let's say, maybe this would be possible, I don't know. Never mind. Connection because I changed my server. Restart. Systemctl restart nginx. Yeah, I guess I'm not entirely sure what that slash is doing there. But basically it'll try and serve that file, and if it can't serve the file, it will return 404. So pretty straightforward, I think. So we can actually see we have this PHP configuration down here already, ready to go. And we could we'll come back and we'll actually uncomment that so we can get PHP code execution in a little bit here. But let's do a couple other things. Let's change our root to var dub, let's say. Start nginx, var dub. So now we're over here. If we try and reload this, it won't succeed. But if we go back into the HTML path again, we can navigate down into that directory. So one thing to note about Apache or nginx is it does not have directory listings by default. So that's one of the things that we saw on Apache is if we didn't have an index file, if we didn't have a path that actually matched anything, we would get a directory listing. That's not the case on nginx. And I don't really care about directory listings, but you could probably go about enabling them. I'm not actually sure if it's built into nginx, but it generally isn't particularly relevant. It's just kind of a security thing that you don't want people to see your directory indexes more than not. So again, we could say index at let's do the same thing. Let's add a text index that we did with Apache. So let's say I wanted index.text, and I said welcome to my web server. So by default, index.text isn't actually an index file. What we want to do is go back over to our configuration, and we want to add an index file to this directive. We could just say index.txt, text, restart, and go over here, and it would and it would show us our text file as our index for our web server. So just remember, when we're talking about index files just mean if there isn't actually any full file specified, it will go through that list of different files and it will look for them in the directory in addition to any file that's specified. So again, the reason why when I go into HTML into that directory that we get this index file is because it's here in this list. So this index is first. So if I wanted our actual nginx page to be shown first, I could just delete that from that portion of the list. And hopefully when I put it earlier in that directive and restart, what that will do is it will instead show this page, because it would go through that list and it would find the first one it possibly could, and it would serve that one back to you first. So that's kind of interesting, I guess. So later on what we'll do is we'll configure a PHP file to be our index, which is kind of interesting. So let's look at this whole secrets thing again. Let's try and prevent this secrets.txt from actually being served. We can look at a couple different directives here. We could say location and then secrets.text, and we could just say deny all. We could actually say what error code we want to specifically return. We could return 403, could return 404 for not found, and pretend that it's not there. So before I do anything, I'm just going to switch back to HTML as our root directory. Just so I don't have to type that path out every time. So we're back in HTML over here. Oh no, back to the configuration. Just kidding. So we go in here, we specify a new location. I'll say location secrets.txt, and I'll just say deny all. Just use that deny all directive right there. And before I actually restart, I just want to show that it actually is able to serve it right now. So we see secrets.txt. We got a secret back in response. If I go ahead and restart that, and I check this again, now it will return a 403 forbidden. So that's pretty straightforward. And the other demo that we did before was we want to hide all the secrets anywhere they are. So any secrets.text we want to prevent from being served to the user. So if I go over here right now, I think this will end up working. Test secrets.txt. That will still get served. Now I'm going to try one thing to start out with here. I might be able to just remove this slash, and that might work. Otherwise, we will put it in regular expression mode and do it the other way. Yeah, so that doesn't work. So what we'll do is we'll put it in regular expression mode. So I think I talked about the syntax before. We can just the same as Apache, we can put this tilde right here to put it in regular expression mode. So now, if this secrets.txt is found anywhere in the URL, it will prevent it from being served. So now we can see we got a 403 on this path. We got a 403 on that path. But one of the unintended consequences with that would be, let's say I had something like secrets.txt.png or something like that. If I went to that path, which isn't the path that we want, that would also be forbidden. So one of the things we might want to do is tighten up our regular expression a little bit and actually add this $sign to the very end. Where's that $sign? So any path that ends in secret.text will be denied. Not just ones that contain it, so just being a little more specific there. Refreshing again. Oh. And we can see that that was now served. Now this is a little bit strange. This is one of the things you might come across, at least when you're working with PHP, is let's say you had specified a kind of regular expression that wasn't full. Let's say you had your regular expression as contains.php or something like that. One of the things that might happen is if you're hosting a website, something like that, and you have some sort of upload functionality, somebody might be like, mypicture.php.png. And if your regular expression was contains PHP, you might allow a user to actually execute PHP code on your server, even though they were only allowed to upload PNG files. So it's really important to make sure that you're using the proper regular expressions to prevent people from just uploading PHP scripts to your server and executing them. The other thing that's interesting to note that's happening here is you noticed how, where is it? In this secrets.txt.png, you can see there's actually some text, but when it comes over to the browser here, it's not actually interpreting that as text. You can see there's like this little thing up here, and that's like a data image. So when a web server, whether it's Apache or nginx, serves this kind of fake PNG file that's not real, it's actually using something called meme types. Meme types, yeah. Mime type. It's meme, M-I-E-M, or I don't know how it's actually pronounced. But it's just something that's interesting to note really quick. I think it's in here. This meme.types or mime. Again, don't know how it's spelled. And that will actually look through, and it will look at the file extension that's being served, and it will associate this type of data with it. So when I serve this PNG file, it's actually indicating to the browser it's of this image.png type. So regardless of the content that's actually in my file, the browser is going to interpret it as an image instead of as a text file. Now, it's easy enough to get around that. Now, I don't know why we would specifically want to get around it. But we could go into this file and we could comment out that line. I think comments are allowed in here. Yeah. And if we commented out that line, we can see now it's downloading. So now it's taking a completely different behavior and downloading instead of actually rendering in the browser. So that's kind of interesting, I guess. And sometimes you'll have to interact with this if you have an application that's serving certain things. Let's say you have a PHP script that generates images or something like that. Now you'd probably just set the meme type in the PHP file itself, but you might also have to go into this file to overwrite certain things. So pretty much covered what I wanted to there. The final thing that I wanted to cover is redirecting in nginx. So let's say we go to one URL and we want the user to actually be sent to another URL. So let's go HTML. Let's say I'll just say I have this redirect.html. I'll just have a, well, let's not even have a file. There'll be no file that it actually corresponds to here. Let's just go back to our configuration, and let's say location redirect me. We'll say / redirect me. What we can say is we can say return 302, and we'll just redirect me to / we'll just redirect him right to /. I think we might have to specify a full URL though, so I'll say in this case HTTP localhost /. So we'll restart. I messed something up, of course. Might need a semicolon. Hopefully that's all I need. Yeah, all I needed was a semicolon in that case. So what I'll do, just go over here to make sure it's still working. I'll navigate to this redirect me URL, and it's obvious. Okay, that was dumb. I'm not running this on my own computer. I'm running this on this host. So you notice what happened there. It did actually redirect me to this URL. We can redirect arbitrary URLs as long as we specify them right here. But instead of doing that, what I want to do is do this, is redirect to that server. And I got a few too many characters here. Restart. And now we can see, and this might actually still be broken. No, okay. So I went to that redirect me URL, and it popped me back over to this server. So that's just something interesting that you can do when you inside of your nginx configuration. I'm just going to test this out really quick here and see if I can. I'm just kind of curious. I forget if you can do this. Redirect without an actual URL. And it looks like you can. Okay, yeah. So you can just redirect without providing the full URL, actually. So that's kind of worth doing. One of the common things you'll see with this approach is you will redirect from an HTTP site to an HTTPS site. So the normal thing that would happen is when somebody went to something like google.com or something, it will originally go to the HTTP site, the port 80 site, and then what Google would do is they'd actually redirect you a couple times, actually, and we kind of looked at this before when we were looking at curl. It would redirect you to the HTTPS site eventually. So that's a common thing we'd want to do, so we would just say HTTPS, and then 192.168.253.54. And since we're not running an HTTPS server right now, it's just going to error out on us, unfortunately. And it will just say, refuse to connect, can't be reached. But we do see that our URL is in fact correct. So that's kind of worth noting. So that's pretty much what we want to know about nginx. So let's just go ahead and we'll enable that PHP execution. So we'll just edit our file here. So we can see it's actually pretty simple. They have this snippet of code ready to go for us to enable, for us to do PHP. You can notice their regular expression is much simpler. Basically, if the URI ends in PHP, it will execute that file as PHP. So what I'll do is uncomment a couple things right here. We're not using the PHP FPM TCP socket right now, so I'll leave that one commented out. But again, same principle as with Apache. It will just pass whatever script we're executing to this secondary process so it can be executed. And one of the other things that they do explicitly here in nginx is they actually have a bunch of fastCGI parameters that are passed along with your script to fastCGI. On Apache, that was kind of just implicit, but on nginx, it's a little bit different. So what we'll do is we'll just restart nginx. Everything seems to be in order. Actually, before we do anything, let's demonstrate. This is going to break. This is going to break everything. It's not going to like this at all, I don't think. Let's demonstrate quickly that our PHP code is being executed. It's not going to like this at all. And that time it downloaded it. That's kind of weird. Okay. So it definitely was not executed. So we turn on that handler right there. And then we will go to info.php. Still downloading it. What in the world? I think I must have messed up my types, so it's downloading it instead of actually executing, which is super annoying. But shouldn't have touched the types file. It's odd. It's definitely right. I think it's something in my, I think I messed up something. It's just my browser is being weird now. Let's try and open it in Safari instead. Okay, see, and then it works perfectly fine over here in Safari. So I guess I messed something up with my browser types or something, and it wasn't interpreting things right. But anyway, we can see that just simply by installing PHP FPM, this is literally the process. You install PHP FPM, you uncomment these couple lines right here, just saying if it is a PHP file, you want to pass it over to PHP FPM for it to process, and then the results will be sent back to the client right here. And we can see we had that execution as expected from before. Now, okay, I think I figured out what was probably messed up. If we actually looked at our types, I didn't figure it out, I don't know for sure, but I have a pretty good idea of what happened. Remember when I was in here and I was searching for PHP, and it wasn't found anywhere or anything? What the browser might have done, what Chrome might have done, is it might have just assumed that it was the type of the last file that I had, and it just kind of downloaded it for some reason. And the only way that the type on PHP gets set is actually by being processed, by being passed to fast CGI, and fast CGI would actually set the type of the result of the PHP file. And without the PHP actually being processed, just continued to assume that it was the same type. So, just stupid issues that are probably going to result in a lot of headaches later on, but they're ultimately issues that can be resolved. So, that pretty much covers our web servers. So there's 2 different web servers we want to use. Covers how we would go about enabling PHP on them. And that's pretty much all we want to do right now. So at this point, you should have enough knowledge to be able to go ahead and build the setup right here. You should be able to have one of your boxes, I guess, with a web server running PHP code, and then another one of your boxes with the actual database itself. And then again, later on, I think I'll put this off until later, we're going to have one box that's taking requests, and then 2 boxes that are processing application logic, and then another box that is actually processing database logic. But we'll come back to that in a little bit. So in the near future, I think I might spend Friday talking very, very briefly about WordPress, but it should be super straightforward to install. What you'll have to do in the course of installing WordPress is download it onto your application server. You'll have to create a database user. Those are things we've already talked about. And then configure your actual application to connect to that database. So there's a few different moving parts there. So I might talk very briefly about WordPress on Friday, and then hopefully get you an assignment working with that pretty soon. So yeah, I think that's all I have for you today. Again, any questions, feel free to